I don't know where that came from, but it just felt right to say, so I went ahead and said it. He was a Catholic priest in Rome at the time of Claudius II, who was emperor from 268 to 270 AD. So we go back a few years with St. Valentine's. I think that this story of him is remarkable in itself. It has a mythic substrate to it that I want to share with you. The short version is that this time in Western history was a period of transition from one mythology to another. The older pagan gods of Rome were being challenged by the new religion of Christianity. Polytheism was beginning to surrender to monotheism. The challenge was great because these two tectonic plates of classical pagan mythological figures was coming into conflict with the historical reality of Christ. Now, why I find it fascinating, I'm absolutely enchanted with the relationship between myth and history. And here's the question that I pose to myself that I'm going to pose to you out of this story. In what ways is myth historical? And then I want to flip it. In what way is history mythological? Because myth and history cannot be separated from one another. Myths happen in a historical context, and history happens in a mythic context. So Valentine is an interesting embodiment of this conflict, and yet watch the story because there's a complementary quality within that conflict. And here it is. So the conflict, polytheism, monotheism. With the advent of Christ's historical presence and the force of his teachings, most specifically, to my mind, and appropriate for tonight, on the nature and practice of love, which we might see best as the embodiment of charity, one of the church's cardinal virtues, as you well know, along with faith and hope. Now, St. Valentine was arrested and interrogated about his refusal to worship the older deities. If history can squash historical references to Christ, then polytheism lives. If those voices gather steam, polytheism is in jeopardy. He was, the story has it, turned over to one of the judges of Rome, a man by the name of Asterius. And during his Valentine's house arrest, the two men spoke about two forms of worship. Asterius challenged Valentine by asking him to heal his daughter's blindness. And if he did, he and his entire household would convert to Christianity. The young girl was brought to the priest, who restored her sight in a miraculous transformation. History, myth, for me, it's irrelevant. It's a good story. Perhaps we're being asked to consider then that love is not as blind as we've been led to believe. Perhaps love equals another form of seeing. It is its own mode of knowing. In gratitude to the saint and to his God, Asterius and his family converted to Christianity by being baptized, and in the process of their conversion, they destroyed all images of the pagan deities in their household. Asterius' household consisted, we are told, of 40 members, servants, help, family members. They were all subsequently assassinated for their new faith. Valentine himself was thrown into prison and beaten until dead. He is buried, the story has it, on the Via Flaminia in Rome. As is true of most of the church's holy figures, Valentine was a patron saint of a certain group. Now here's where myth enters history. In this case, of young girls. In ways that can be debated, his name became associated with romantic love, in part because of what some have called a chance coincidence between the dates of his death and a pagan spring festival dedicated to the goddess Juno. Now, here's what I find so fascinating about this. It seems to me that the story gathers around a conflict between two mythologies and winds up uniting those very conflictual forces. The festival was in honor of the young boys and girls of the city, and some suggest it passed the romantic association on to Saint Valentine. That's how myths migrate. In a conflation of two religious belief systems, the early church leaders adopted the pagan Roman lovers' festival and assigned Valentine's name to it. And that's why February 14th is Valentine's Day. It is both a pagan/Christian festival date with romantic love of adolescence as its nugget. Now, there is more than enough in this story to keep us busy for the rest of the night, especially if those doors lock up at 9. Then we're in it. And then we'll bring all the candy kisses down and we'll all get drunk on chocolate. However, that's not my destination. Dante's poem is, but it is important at least to mention on our pilgrimage to his most important creation, the Divine Comedy, which incidentally he did not call it. Now, just to situate him, Dante's dates are 1265 to 1321. The earliest record of the poem being in circulation, which means it was completed, is 1314, 7 years before he died. That it would not have come into existence without two events that preceded it. One, the chance, and many of you know this story, but if you don't, I want to situate the poem in a context. The chance meeting, while Dante was a young boy of 9 in the city of Florence, of a young woman, Beatrice Portinari, a young Florentine, who when Dante came upon her in the streets of Florence, was immediately fixed and transformed in what James Joyce, centuries later, would call a moment of aesthetic arrest. He was smitten. Now, my belief is that no one in this room has escaped such a paralyzing and galvanizing moment in one's life, an instant when on seeing or experiencing the presence of the other through the quickening power of love. Whatever else we want to say about love, and I bet you've got a lot to say about it, it has that quality of quickening at the same time that it's arresting. Now, feel that tension between the two. All of you knows that one's life has just been changed in some permanent way, so powerful is the presence of this all-encompassing emotion and its capacity to transform one almost immediately. Now, if you dare,